Hello everyone, and welcome to my Beyond the Gates official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Anita had always believed that life, even at its most complicated, still found a way to offer a sliver of mercy, but the moment the doctor's voice cracked slightly while delivering the prognosis, 3 months, maybe a little more if the new medication cooperated, she felt the world tilt as though the hospital floor had dropped away from her, leaving her suspended in a slow, crushing freefall that no one could see but her. And in that sterile room filled with the faint hum of machines and the scent of disinfectant, she broke down in a way she never had before, burying her face in trembling hands as the tears poured through her fingers and her breath came in jagged, desperate bursts that echoed against the tile walls. It wasn't just fear. Though fear certainly clawed at every nerve of her body, it was the realization of everything she hadn't done, all the apologies she'd never made, the places she'd kept promising herself she'd visit someday when life was less busy, the people she'd pushed away because she was too proud or too scared or too tired to hold on. And as the doctor gently placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a quiet apology that did nothing to ease the shattering in her chest, Anita felt her thoughts spiral through the memories she had tried so hard to forget. The day she arrived in this town with nothing but a suitcase and a hope that beyond the gates would be a fresh start. The night she met Bill at Winterfest before everything went wrong. The moment she first suspected that her life had taken a turn she couldn't fix. The years she wasted convincing herself she wasn't worthy of more than the chaos she constantly stumbled into. And now, hearing she had only 3 months left, she wondered if the universe was punishing her for every moment she had hardened her heart instead of opening it, every time she had pushed love away instead of embracing it, every time she had stayed silent when she should have spoken. Yet even through her sobs, she felt a new sensation she couldn't entirely name, a painful but strangely clarifying awareness of time, of how precious every remaining second would now be. And as she lifted her face from her hands, eyes red and voice trembling, she whispered to the doctor that she needed to be alone, not because she didn't appreciate the kindness, but because she needed space to absorb the enormity of those 3 months, space to understand what came next, space to accept the storm that had just overtaken her life. Stumbling out into the hallway, she felt the cold metal railing beneath her palm as she steadied herself, staring at the busy bustle of nurses and visitors and realizing how surreal it was that life continued so normally for everyone else while hers had just been sentenced to an early ending. She tried to gather the strength to walk to the elevator, but her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the hallway bench, gasping for breath as memories of her childhood flooded back. The first day she realized her mother's illness would consume her, the promise she made at the bedside that she would live boldly because her mother never got the chance, and how far she had drifted from that promise through years of bitterness, shame, mistakes, and fear. Her hands shook as she pulled her phone from her pocket, staring at the screen, wondering who to call first, who deserved to know, who would care, who would be angry at her for hiding the truth, who would pretend not to care, but secretly fall apart, and most of all, who she needed to face before time ran out. Her fingers hovered over her sister's name, Claire, who lived 2 states away and hadn't spoken to Anita in nearly 4 years after a fight over money and pride and old childhood wounds. But she couldn't bring herself to dial, because how did you tell someone you'd wronged repeatedly that you were dying? Would Claire even pick up? Would she slam the emotional door in Anita's face again? Or would she finally, after all this time, let the anger melt long enough to say goodbye? The thought made Anita's tears start anew, hot and relentless, and she shoved her phone back into her jacket, pushing herself up from the bench as she forced herself toward the elevator, needing to get out of the hospital before she drowned beneath the pressure of its walls. When she stepped outside, the winter wind slapped her cheeks with icy sharpness, grounding her just enough to move forward, though she still felt the weight of every step like she was walking through grief, the thickness of cement. The town square across from the hospital was already decorated for the upcoming Winterfest celebration, strings of silver lights twinkling from lamppost to lamppost, wreaths hanging proudly from shop doors, the faint sound of carolers rehearsing in the distance, and the bitter irony hit her so hard she almost laughed, while the whole town was preparing for a joyful celebration. She had just been handed a countdown to her final days. She wandered toward the fountain in the center of the square, the same fountain where Bill had once confessed he'd suspected poisoning before anyone else believed him, and for a long moment she just sat there, watching the water cascade over the stone like time slipping away unnoticed. She thought about telling Haley, who had just lost Bill and had enough heartbreak weighing on her shoulders. She imagined telling Sharon, whose own family drama had reached the point where even Winterfest announcements were soaked in scandal. She pictured the judgmental whispering from Leslie, the inevitable worry in Vernon's voice, the questions from Ted and Shanice, who always seemed to show up when trouble was brewing, and she wondered if becoming the center of town gossip one last time even mattered now, because soon enough the whispers would fade, replaced by new scandals, new secrets, new heartbreaks. She would become another name added to the list of Beyond the Gates residents who left too soon. The wind cut deeper, and Anita wrapped her coat tighter around herself, leaning back against the cool stone of the fountain as she whispered to no one in particular that she wasn't ready to die. She wasn't ready to leave this world without fixing the pieces she'd broken. She wasn't ready to let go of the people she still loved despite the fear that kept her distant. And as she stared up at the cloudy sky above, she wondered if she would ever find the courage to make peace with the past in the little time she had left. But before she could sink any further into despair, her phone buzzed unexpectedly, startling her, and when she glanced at the screen, she saw a text from Rollins, a man she had once dated briefly, a man who had recently revealed a dark secret that had sent shockwaves through the community, a man whose presence in her life now felt like a cautionary tale, and for a split second she considered ignoring it. But something inside her urged her to open it, and when she did, she found only 4 words. "We need to talk." Her stomach twisted. Why now? Did he know? Had someone at the hospital said something? Was this about his secret resurfacing or something entirely new? She shoved the phone back into her pocket, deciding she had no room left for anyone else's darkness when her own life warm smile and asking if she wanted her regular drink. But when she saw the way Anita's hands shook as she reached for her wallet, her expression softened, and she asked gently if everything was all right. Anita opened her mouth to respond, to lie, to pretend everything was fine for just a little longer, but the words caught in her throat as another wave of reality crashed over her, and instead she collapsed into the chair nearest the window, whispering, "I'm dying, Ruth," her voice cracking like glass, and Ruth, without hesitation or shock or judgment, quietly walked around the counter, placed a comforting hand on Anita's back, and told her with a steady calmness that she didn't have to face it alone. That simple reassurance, so human, so grounding, broke something open inside Anita all over again, and she leaned forward, resting her forehead against the cool table surface as she cried through the confession she had been too afraid to share with anyone else. She told Ruth about the diagnosis, the timeline, the fear, the regrets, the people she had hurt, the apologies she didn't know how to give, the dreams she'd never get to realize, the places she'd never see, the love she had denied herself. And as Ruth listened, squeezing her hand, Anita felt the smallest spark of strength return, not enough to erase the pain, but enough to help her breathe. When her tears finally slowed, Ruth insisted on making her a cup of tea on the house, something herbal and calming, and Anita held the warm cup between both trembling hands, staring out the window at the bustling square, realizing that while 3 months felt impossibly short, it was also something. It was time, limited but real, time she could still shape, time she could still use to undo the worst of her mistakes, time she could fill with meaning if she stopped running from the parts of herself she'd always been afraid to face. And as she took a slow sip of tea, she whispered into the rising steam that if she was going to die soon, then she would at least make sure that the story of her final months would not be defined by fear but by honesty, forgiveness, reconnection, and courage. She didn't know how she would find her sister, or how Claire would react, or how the town would change once they learned the truth, but she stood from the table with newfound resolve, pushed open the cafe door, and walked into the cold afternoon with the silent promise that before her time in Beyond the Gates ended, she would mend what she could, say what needed to be said, and leave behind a version of herself she could finally be proud of. Anita left the cafe with the tea's warmth still lingering faintly in her chest, as if it were the last comforting ember glowing in a life rapidly dimming, and although the winter air slapped her face with a sharp coldness that ordinarily would have made her hurry home, she walked slowly, deliberately, feeling every step like she was relearning the rhythm of living. The streets of Beyond the Gates buzzed with the early energy of Winterfest preparations, workers stringing lights across rooftops, vendors hammering wooden booths into place, children weaving between adults while clutching cups of hot cocoa far too large for their small hands, and Anita couldn't help but marvel at how surreal it felt to exist in a world that was celebrating while her own was collapsing. She wandered toward the park, drawn by the instinct to find somewhere quiet, though she knew there was no real quiet left within her, not with the doctor's words echoing endlessly in her mind, replaying like a sentence she could neither appeal nor escape. And as she reached the park's old wooden bridge, the one where she once told Claire she'd never forgive her, the one she later avoided because the memory hurt too much, she felt a sudden rush of guilt that nearly knocked the breath from her chest. Claire deserved to know, regardless of their fights, regardless of the silence they'd built like a wall between them, and with trembling fingers Anita pulled her phone out again, staring at her sister's contact, the familiar name glowing on the screen like a doorway she didn't know how to step through. But before she could decide whether to call or text, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed behind her, and she turned to find Haley jogging across the bridge, cheeks flushed from the cold, hair escaping her beanie in loose strands. And the moment Haley saw Anita's face, she stopped abruptly, the concern in her expression forming even before she said a word. "Are you okay?" Haley asked, breathless, and Anita felt her throat tighten because this was the moment, her moment to tell someone, to finally share the truth. But the words lodged in her chest like thorns as she forced a shaky smile and insisted she was fine, though her trembling voice betrayed her. Haley didn't buy it for a second, stepping closer, her brows knitting with the same empathy she had shown during Bill's poisoning scandal, during the chaos of her runaway, during every storm the town threw her way. And Anita felt the weight of Haley's gaze like a spotlight shining on the cracks she could no longer hide. She tried to swallow the truth again, to bury it a little longer, but the dam broke without warning. Her breath hitched, her eyes filled, and she collapsed into Haley's arms, sobbing against her shoulder as she choked out the words she had been terrified to say aloud. "I'm dying. Haley, I only have 3 months." The world around them went silent as if the town itself had paused mid-breath. Haley held her tightly, one hand gripping her coat, the other smoothing her hair as though trying to anchor her to the moment, repeating softly, "It's okay. I'm here. I've got you." But her voice trembled slightly, betraying the shock rippling beneath her calm. When Anita finally pulled back, wiping her tears with shaking hands, Haley asked what had happened, how long she'd known, whether anyone else was aware, and Anita explained everything. The diagnosis, the doctor's words, the terror, the regret, the fear of telling Claire, and Haley listened with a steadiness Anita desperately needed, though the sadness in her eyes deepened with every sentence. After a beat of heavy silence, Haley insisted that Anita shouldn't go through this alone, that she should tell someone she trusted, someone who loved her, someone who could help carry the weight. But Anita shook her head, explaining, in a voice barely above a whisper, that she didn't know how to begin mending the damage she'd caused, how to face the people she'd left behind, how to open wounds that had never fully healed. She expected Haley to argue, but instead Haley took her hands and said quietly, "Then let me help you." And Anita felt something break inside her again, not in despair this time, but in gratitude. The two of them walked toward the center of the park, the cold wind swirling around them, the sound of laughter drifting from the square in the distance, and as they sat together on a frosted bench, Anita confessed fear she had never spoken aloud, the fear of dying alone, the fear of being remembered only for her mistakes, the fear that if she reached out to Claire, her sister might reject her even now, leaving her final months filled with unhealed wounds instead of closure. Haley listened, nodding, occasionally squeezing her hand when the words grew too painful, and when Anita finished, Haley told her something she hadn't expected to hear, that she understood more than she realized. Haley spoke softly about her own regrets with Bill, how she wished she had seen the signs earlier, how she missed chances to apologize, how she wished she had fought harder to save him from the poison that had nearly ended his life, and how guilt still sat on her chest every night. And hearing Haley open up so vulnerably made Anita feel less alone, less like a burden, less like a dying woman, dragging grief behind her. Their conversations stretched on until the sky deepened into a bruised, purple twilight, and the lampposts flickered to life one by one, casting a warm glow across the snow-dusted park. Eventually Haley stood and said they couldn't stay out in the cold forever, offering to walk Anita home. But as they reached the edge of the park, Anita froze. The door to her building was open, and standing in the glow of the hallway light was someone she never expected to see. Claire. Her sister's expression was unreadable, her arms crossed tightly against the cold, and for a moment Anita wondered if this was a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But then Claire stepped forward, her voice unsteady as she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And Anita felt her heart plummet because she knew instantly. Someone had told her. Someone had broken the news she hadn't been ready to share. Her stomach twisted as she asked how Claire had found out, and Claire hesitated before admitting that the hospital had called when Anita left abruptly, concerned she might be overwhelmed, and when they mentioned the diagnosis, Claire had driven through the night to get here. Anita's knees weakened, not from illness this time but from the flood of emotions crashing through her. Shame, relief, fear, love, and before she could say a word, Claire crossed the distance between them and pulled her into a fierce embrace, whispering through shaky breaths, "Don't shut me out again. Not now. Not like this." And in that moment, wrapped in her sister's arms with Haley standing protectively beside her, Anita felt the smallest flicker of hope, fragile, trembling, but real, because maybe, just maybe, these 3 months wouldn't be just a countdown to the end but the beginning of something she had long believed impossible, healing. The embrace with Claire felt like a dam breaking, not in the overwhelming, drowning way the diagnosis had shattered her world, but in the sense of something long frozen finally cracking open enough to let warmth seep through. And as Anita clung to her sister, shaking with emotions too tangled to name, she realized that despite everything, the years of silence, the bitterness, the old injuries, they were still family, still tethered by a bond neither time nor anger had truly severed. When they finally pulled apart, Claire cupped Anita's face gently, almost fearfully, as if afraid she might vanish if she let go, and whispered with trembling certainty that she wasn't going anywhere, not now, not for any reason, not until Anita told her everything she had been holding in. And as they stepped inside the small apartment, Haley following quietly behind them like a silent pillar of support, Anita felt both comforted and terrified, because now that Claire was here, she could no longer hide, could no longer bury the truth beneath excuses or distance. The living room lights flickered on, revealing the familiar clutter, half-read books on the coffee table, a blanket draped messily over the couch, a cup she had forgotten to wash in the sink, and for a moment Anita felt the sting of embarrassment, realizing